Hello, good evening. I think we are live. Hello, greetings. Hello, hi. I just wait a minute for everybody to join. Okay. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to this session of the praises of Dharmadhatu. We are going to continue then with the text. So last time we reached stanza 50. Now we are going straight to 51. So stanza 50 finished section B2.1, which was meditation. So remember, we are on B2, which was how to practice, and that had two parts: the meditation and the conditions for the realization of the three jewels, right? So the part of meditation was the meditation in 7 parts, which we already looked at. It was the part, the B2.1 section. Now we're on the B2.2, which is the condition for the realization as the 3 jewels, which is the second part of this section of the text on how to put this into practice. So now in this section on B2.2, it's going to elaborate on some quite important aspects, actually, to understand in terms of the function of our practice in general, and in specific in relation to this aspect of Buddha nature. So, stanza 51, which introduces this part of the condition for the realization of the 3 jewels, stanza 51 says, "The strengths, all 10, assist the immature with a blessing force like that of the crescent moon. But as long as they are caught up in afflictions, beings will fail to see the dust gone once." So the strength, all 10, so the 10 powers, we already looked at that before, the 10 powers assist the immature with a blessing force like that of a crescent moon. But as long as they are caught up in affliction, beings will fail to see the Buddhas. So here it starts by explaining that due to the Buddha's infinite qualities, which we already talked before, right? So due to the Buddha's infinite qualities, and in particular here he's mentioning the 10 powers, 10 strength. So due to the Buddha's infinite qualities, and in particular the 10 powers, immature sentient beings perceive the Buddha's qualities, and they perceive a Buddha appearing as like an object, or like in a subject-object way. That is, a sentient being seeing a Buddha and the manifestation of those qualities, like like someone seeing Buddha Shakyamuni, for example, manifesting these qualities. And it is saying that this is like seeing a crescent moon. What that means? That means that it is a moon that is partially hidden. So it is not completely visible. You only see a part of the moon. So for beings who are blessed by the 10 powers, they are capable of perceiving the Buddha's compassion, even if it is still kind of in a dualistic and limited manner. And they are benefited in that way. However, sentient beings who are very much still entrapped or, trapped by very strong afflictions, by very gross, strong affliction and delusion, even that they cannot see. Even the Buddha in a dualistic manner, they could not see. Even the word Buddha, they will never hear. Even the word awakening, they will never hear, which it will be coming next. But so this is sort of a general introduction, because now we're going to talk about what are the conditions for realizing the 3 jewels, and so we'll explain this in more detail. But this stanza is sort of introducing here that these qualities of the Buddha, in the beginning, they seem to appear for those who have some kind of roots of virtue. They seem to manifest in a dualistic fashion, like something outside, or even like a Buddha, like appearing somehow, that manifests these powers, and that brings some kind of benefit, and it's kind of a force that helps beings to progress in the path. But as long as they are caught up in too much afflictions, they cannot see the Buddhas. So that's basically what this is saying. And now it's going to kind of go into more detail. And why is that important? So 221, how Buddhas are not seen. How Buddhas are not seen. So 52, just as those in the hungry spirit realms see the sea as dry before their eyes, just so with those in ignorance's grip who think the Buddhas don't exist. So even though our Buddha nature is ever present, and pure, and Buddhas are ever present, Buddha is ever present, beings are not aware of it due to these temporary defilements, which we looked before. So here it's using in particular the example of beings that inhabit this realm of the hungry ghosts, the Preta realm, which are beings who suffer very much from always lacking something. So traditionally they will say they're always like suffering from like hunger or thirst continuously, and it can never be satisfied. So in that state of consciousness, they would say that even if they are facing an ocean of water, they are not able to perceive the water due to their obscurations and to that particular state of consciousness. So beings in that particular state of consciousness are not able to perceive the water, even though it's there. So in the same way, due to ignorance and due to certain habitual imprints, some people think that Buddha is not something concrete, that there's no such thing as Buddha. There's no such thing as awakening. There's no such thing as nirvana. There's no such thing as rebirth and Buddha nature, and those things don't exist. It's just fantasy. And that is just like the example of these hungry ghosts. Even though that's like the example of this hungry ghost, that even though the water is there, because of the habitual imprints, they are unable to perceive it. So this hi, hello. Okay, well, welcome. So, this is more clarified in the next stanza. So I'll just go through this. So, 53, for lesser beings, and so 53, for lesser beings and those with lesser merit, no matter what transcendent conquerors do, it is like placing a precious jewel in the hands of someone never known to see. So, for beings with lesser merit or insufficient roots of virtue, no matter what the Buddhas do, it is like putting a jewel, a precious jewel, in the hands of someone who cannot see. So what is it? So this is now clarifying a bit more. So basically, it is saying here that it all comes down to the roots of virtue. You see, it all comes down to the roots of virtue. For beings who do not have the roots of virtue, no matter what the Buddhas would do, they would still not understand or even have any, they would not accept anything or understand anything as awakening, nirvana, Buddhahood, and so on, or even have any aspirations to attain awakening, or even accept that such a thing is even possible. And this is, you see, when we say like this, when we say that they would not even accept such a thing as Buddha, Buddhahood, awakening, samsara, nirvana, any of these things, to say that such a thing is not even considered possible in any way, that's the same as saying not seeing Buddhas. It's the same thing, you understand? If we see, like it said in the stanza before, so the title of, or the subject of in the textual outline that starts on stanza 52, it says how Buddhas are not seen. So this is not seeing Buddhas, you see, it's the same thing. So if we give a beautiful, I'll come to that. If we give a beautiful jewel, like it says in the stanza, if we give a beautiful jewel to a blind person to admire, they will not be able to admire it. It is just not possible because they cannot see it. It is not possible for them. It is just it's not a matter of understanding or not understanding or anything. They're just not able to, because they can't see it. So look so beautiful. Looks so beautiful, but if the person cannot see, it's not possible. And that's what he's trying to convey here. It is something much deeper than just will or interest. It is just really kind of inability at this point. So this is actually very similar to a very famous metaphor that is found in the Bible, right? So I think in the Bible, Jesus uses a very, very similar metaphor when he says, do not throw pearls before swine, for they will just turn and attack you. It is a similar meaning, actually. And also, there's a poem that was written by Norbu Rinpoche. He wrote a poem many years ago called what is it called? As you wish, I believe it's called. As you wish, I think. As you will, or something like this. And there's a passage on that poem which is very similar to this as well. It says something like, as for the students to be instructed, if they maintain their commitments, I introduce them, or I teach them, the essential points of practice. But if they don't have this capacity, then I encourage them in every way to train their minds and accumulate virtue. I think something like this. So it's also something very similar kind of meaning, you see. Because if there's no capacity, there's no capacity. If something is not accepted, it's not accepted. Then what can we do? What is the problem? The problem is the view, is the roots of virtue, is this capacity to even perceive the Buddhas. So it all comes down, can we see the Buddhas? And this seeing the Buddhas is not just about, is not a visual thing we're talking about. It can be, right? If somebody has a lot of virtue, they may be able to see the Buddhas with, either like the people that could meet Buddha Shakyamuni, for example, or some other Buddha, or in a vision or whatever. But it's not even that just the meaning. It's much beyond that. As I was saying, it's even if something with the heart or with understanding, with a kind of it's not a visual seeing necessarily we're talking about here, of seeing, not seeing Buddhas. And it is all connected with these roots of virtue. And if we don't have this capacity, if we don't have these roots of virtue, what can we do? What can we tell people? Be a good person, practice generosity, be loving, be compassionate, be kind, don't kill, practice charity, things like this, so that the person can develop these roots of virtue, so that they can start to see Buddhas. And seeing Buddhas, it means to be able to start to accept that such a thing even is possible. And the moment the person starts to understand, oh yeah, maybe there is such a thing as enlightenment, as awakening, as nirvana, or whatever. And the moment such thought arises, oh, maybe that is possible. That's seeing Buddhas already. It's that's what I'm trying to say. That's what this text is trying to say here. So we should understand that in the end, it all comes down to this capacity. And the capacity is related to the roots of virtue. This is a word that sometimes we use a lot, capacity. My teacher uses it a lot, I also use it a lot, capacity. Capacity is something that we may have or may not have. We may have more capacity, less capacity, or no capacity, But capacity, the word capacity is good because it's something, it implies something you can develop, Like if someone doesn't have a lot of capacity, for example, to speak a certain foreign language, for example, maybe they're learning a language, and in the beginning they don't have much capacity. They try to speak, but it's very difficult. They don't know many words, and they make a lot of mistakes. But as they keep practicing and learning new words, they gradually develop their capacity until they can speak fluently. So when in a text we speak about not much, because many texts are organized like this, it says clearly, like, practitioners of low capacity, medium capacity, high capacity. And sometimes people can become a little bit offended, but why are you saying I have low capacity, Well, maybe you do, I don't know. Maybe you have medium capacity, high capacity, I don't know. But it's about understanding where we are. And capacity also means we can develop. That's the most important principle, is how can I develop? If I understand what is my capacity, then I understand what I can develop, how I can practice, And this capacity is very much connected with these roots of virtue. That's what it's saying here. So if we have the roots of virtue, if we have some roots of virtue, we can see Buddhas, Look, there, Buddha. There, you can see that? Buddha. See? Yeah. Buddha, You can see Buddhas, It's like this. It means you have some roots of virtue. Otherwise, you couldn't see Buddhas. So, in a literal being, what I'm trying to say is being in a literal sense or in a metaphorical sense. So, depending on the case, then we can do something and we can progress, we can develop. If we do not have roots of virtue or enough capacity, then perhaps we cannot really engage in the right way. And if we cannot really engage in the right way, then first we should develop our capacity and develop our roots of virtue, If someone does not have the roots of virtue, they do not accept anything about the spiritual path. It is just not possible. They just don't. It doesn't matter if the person is intelligent or it's not connected with intelligence, is not connected with education, is not connected with being even a good person, in an ordinary sense. Because there are many people who are in an ordinary way, we can say it's a nice person. It's a decent person, They're generally decent people, they don't hurt anybody. They're helpful to others. They're usually kind. It's a nice person. But they totally reject anything spiritual, completely. It's impossible even to talk about it, So we have to, and if we ask ourselves, what does it mean? It means exactly what Nagarjuna is saying here, Just they don't have the roots of virtue. So that door is somehow close to them. That window is close to them. They lack capacity, For example, a person that has good roots of virtue, and they meet some yogi who has some real authentic realization, they'll somehow, very soon, they will recognize something. Somehow, they have a sense, and they'll recognize something, and they will see that this person has something different. There's something different there. And automatically, they will feel some kind of respect. And they will feel some wish, to understand what's there. What does this person know that I don't know? Or something like this, They have this kind of sense. But if they don't have the roots of virtue, even if they would meet face to face a fully awakened Buddha, face to face in person, they would only perceive it as an ordinary person, and even may not like the person. May not like, very strange, very strange, And that's the story of one of Buddha's attendants, There's actually a story like this in the sutras. One of the Buddha's attendants that was with the Buddha for many years, but he didn't see anything special about the Buddha. And someday when somebody asked him, you're very lucky. You're always with the Buddha all the time, for so many years. And he goes like, I don't know. Honestly, everybody's coming and so much thing. I don't. From my perspective, the only difference between me and him is that he seems to have some kind of glowing light around him. But even that, I don't know what it is. But other than that, as far as I can tell, he's exactly the same as me. He said like this. He couldn't see, he couldn't perceive. So if you don't have the roots of virtue, even if you meet face to face a fully awakened Buddha, you would not tell. You could not tell that. You just would not be able to tell. You're just like a normal person, On the other hand, after a certain level of realization, after if you have really very strong roots of virtue, very pure vision, even the wind, even the sound of the wind, even the wind rustling on the trees, even the river, the sound of the water, all that is perceived as being Buddhas, male Buddhas, female Buddhas, Dakinis, and so on. So you see, it all depends on this capacity, and this capacity is related to the roots of virtue. So what are these roots of virtue? Well, that's quite a topic, but I'm not just very brief. So the roots of virtue, we could say that on one hand we can say like it's those seeds. It's some specific kind of seeds that are cultivated in these alaya vijnana. And these particular seeds that are planted in the alaya vijnana, we call these roots of virtue. It's things like confidence in the Dharma, for example. Confidence in the Dharma. Have confidence in the teachings, in the path. Generosity. To have a generous attitude, a generous mind, a generous action and behavior. Patience. To cultivate patience, for example. That is roots of virtue. To have joy for virtue, joy for virtue. That's a very important one. That's why we rejoice a lot, like a lot of praise of rejoicing. I rejoice in this, rejoicing in positive things, rejoicing in virtuous things. To cultivate this joy for virtue, I rejoice in the generosity of the bodhisattvas. I rejoice in the patience of the practitioners. I rejoice in the generosity of all beings. I rejoice in the ethical conduct of the bodhisattvas. I rejoice in all these things, and cultivating this joy for virtue. And that's very powerful roots of virtue in our own mind stream. Meditation, the wish for meditation, the love for meditation, the practice of meditation, the study of wisdom, like when you listen to the Dharma, like now, for example, you're listening to the Dharma, you're listening to these teachings. This is roots of virtue. The more you listen to the Dharma, the stronger your roots of virtue become, the more pure your mind becomes. Listening to the Dharma is very important, actually. It's cultivating roots of virtue. And so on. There's more, but anyway, just as a brief introduction. So you see, all this is connected with our study and our practice at all levels. If we lack the appropriate capacity, even if someone tries to teach to us the Dharma, or if someone tries to say to us to cultivate virtue, maybe we just become angry or even turn against this person who's trying to help us. This happens, because there's just not that capacity. The mind does not have that receptivity for this. Which is one of the reasons why, for example, in many teachings, especially in the Vajrayāna teachings, we speak a lot about, not just in, maybe a bit more than in other, but in Vajrayāna maybe a little bit more than in Mahayana. But anyway, we speak about these things of this principle of the qualifications of being a student or a recipient of the teachings. What means to be a qualified vessel, what it means to be a suitable recipient for the teachings. And there's teachings on this. There's particular, like what is the qualifications to be a qualified recipient for the teachings on emptiness? What is the characteristics to be a qualified recipient for like Tantra? What is the qualified to be Dzogchen, for example? All these things are quite clear, actually. Because if we don't have a certain capacity, we can't work with it, and either not accept completely, because it happens, This is why the Buddha taught many different kinds of vehicles and teachings, and we have many different kinds of approaches, gradual, sudden, the Shravakayana, the particular Buddhayana, the Mahayana, all these levels of Tantra and Dzogchen and so on. Because not everybody accepts everything at the same time, For some, there are many people that have trust in the Buddha, Buddhists, but they completely reject the Mahayana, totally, completely reject it. No. The Buddha could have never taught that. I don't accept that. And there are other people that have a lot of trust in the Mahayana and the Bodhisattva path. But if you try to talk to them about the Tantras or even Dzogchen, they completely reject. No. What's that? Strange things. And there are people that maybe they accept like Vajrayāna, but they think it like everything is like very gradual. And if you tell to them, no, you're Buddha right now, like Dzogchen teachings, they completely reject that. So you can see this as an example. This is about capacity. It's about roots of virtue. And this is why the Buddha taught all of this wide range of teachings. And all of them, of course, will lead to the same point. Not that they all lead to the same point, but they will all lead to the ultimate vehicle, which is self-knowing primordial awareness, right? So, but in any case, the point here is how Buddhas are not seen, right? So, how Buddhas are not seen due to lack of capacity, lack of roots of virtue. And a big part of the practice of the practitioner's path is the development of these roots of virtue. To see Buddha. It sounds weird to say it like this, but I want to make it in this vast scope of what see Buddha means, And I've tried to approach this topic with you. I think we had a few chats over the last few weeks, even a couple of days ago. That somehow connects to this. I've been trying to broaden this view of refuge, of the three jewels of Buddha, because this is very important, because when we say to see Buddha, it can mean like to see Buddha, or it can mean to see Buddha, or it can mean to see Buddha. It can mean to see Buddha. There's many different levels of seeing Buddha. Ultimately, is total realization, total awakening is see Buddha. To even listen to these teachings is to see Buddha. Do you understand? To even want to come here, to even want to come here and listen to this is to see Buddha already. The moment, even before coming here, the moment you make a decision, okay, I either go to the bar and have some wine, or I go and listen to the teachings. Which one shall I do? No, I go listen to the teachings. The moment that decision is made, you're seeing Buddha. Actually, already. It's already seeing Buddha somehow. And the more we practice, the more we develop these roots of virtue, the more we cultivate these roots of virtue in our own mind, this vision of Buddha becomes clearer and clearer. In the beginning, it may be dualistic. It may be something external to us somehow, either as an image or a teaching or a book or an idea or a deity, something we have devotion for, which is very important, because devotion is one of these roots of virtue. It's a very important one. Very important one. And in the beginning, it starts in this dual way. And then as we develop capacity and cultivate this virtue further and further and further, gradually this moves inside somehow. And this duality breaks away. But it's important to understand that when we say, and I think this is something I wanted to talk about a little bit, that when we say that this Buddha nature is inside, or all sentient beings have this element, right? As this text it talks about. that all beings possess Buddha nature. It's like this jewel inside them, and so on. And when I say now that this duality comes inside, and then this is we need to understand this properly, you know. And this is where this refuge topic can comes, and maybe we'll leave that for another time, for a Sunday, where we can talk a bit more. But because I feel that this still needs a lot of we need to churn on that quite a bit. I have a feeling for some reason. I think we have to churn that quite a bit more. Because when we say it's inside, it's only a matter, it's only a figure of speech, okay? It's only a figure of speech. It's inside, it's outside, it's neither inside nor outside, you know? And like something that was being talked recently about, oh, it's my own nature. Yeah, this is just skillful means. That itself is skillful means. It's not really like this. Yourself has no true existence. So how can you say my real nature is the Buddha? Which one's real nature? There's only Buddha. There's just Buddha. And that's the ultimate meaning of how Buddha is seen. how Buddha is seen. There's just Buddha. There's no self, no other, no this, no that. There's just Buddha. Buddha nature is not inside you. There's just Buddha. So all these, you see, all these teachings are like sort of step by step, sort of skillful means to gradually turn the mind, to gradually take the mind to that kind of realization, to open the eye, you know, it's a little bit, open the eyes, little bit by little bit, until we can see Buddha. Which leads us to the next stanza. Which are also the next part, how Buddhas are seen. Okay, so we saw how Buddhas are not seen. So Buddhas are not seen if we don't have roots of virtue, right? That's the main point there. And if we don't have the roots of virtue, we cannot see Buddhas. You can, how to say, it's just impossible. You can speak about Buddha, about enlightenment, and a person will not care at all. Yeah, no, that's just nonsense. It's just no roots of virtue. What to do? Not much. Help this person to be a good person. To practice generosity, practice virtue, do good deeds, and not do negative actions. And by that, the roots of virtue will start to grow. And at some point, maybe not this life, maybe next life, I don't know. At some point, they'll see Buddha for the first time, you know? Just like this. This is very realistic. This is how it is. So on the other side, how Buddhas are seen. So that's now B222. So next part, how Buddhas are seen. So stanza 54. For beings who have amassed sufficient merit, the signs are radiant with shining light. All 32 ablaze with brilliant glory. Beings like these in Buddha's presence dwell. So now this is the other side, right? So how Buddha is seen. For beings who have enough merit, the signs are radiant with shining light. All 32 ablaze with brilliant glory. Beings like these in Buddha's presence dwell. Okay, what he's saying. So in this discussion, in this discussion, this discussion, I'm okay. I'm having trouble reading it. So in either if the second, okay, I see. So in the discussion of which one is, if the second or the third turning is definitive, could one say that they are all provisional? Okay, I get it now. That depends on the point of view. On one hand, we can say that they're all provisional because, of course, all the spoken Dharma is provisional, right? Because the real Dharma cannot be spoken. The real Dharma is the Dharma of realization. So we speak. There's two kinds of Dharma, right? There's the scriptural, the Dharma of scripture, and the Dharma of realization, right? The Dharma of realization cannot be spoken. It's beyond concept, beyond expression. So from the perspective of the Dharma of realization, all the turnings of the wheel are provisional, right? They're just kind of how to guide a person to realization. But none of them is the real thing. So in that sense, they're all provisional. If you speak from the perspective of the Dharma of scripture, of the scriptural Dharma, which of the scriptural Dharma presents really the more definitive message, so to speak, then we can say for sure that the first turning is provisional. And then which one is more definitive, the second or the third? Well, there's different schools on that, as you know, right? Some people say the teachings on emptiness, the second turning, is definitive because it's beyond error, while others say no, it's not possible because without the third turning teachings, the second turning is not good enough. So there's positions where you can see that both of them, you need both of them together to be definitive. At different schools. My perspective is that also. My perspective is that the second and turning, the second and third, you must put them together. That's definitive, scripturally speaking. That's my own. Also, that's my position. Okay, so, but from the perspective of the Dharma of realization, then they're all provisional, of course. So, stanza 54, for beings who have amassed sufficient merit, the signs are radiant with shining light, all 32 ablaze with brilliant glory. So the 32 here refers to the 32 major marks. Okay, so anyway, so what does this mean here, 54? For beings who have amassed sufficient merit. So how are Buddhists seen? So it says that when there is sufficient merit, or roots of virtue, so in a relative sense, we can speak in a relative sense of when does a Buddha appear in the world, right? So in a relative sense, we say, when do Buddhas appear? When do Buddhas appear in the world? We speak like this. In the sense of a Buddha appeared, like 2,500 years ago, 2,500 years ago, Buddha Shakyamuni appeared. We say like this, right? But in reality, it is more like, when do beings in the world perceive a Buddha appearing? Do you get the difference? We say, when do Buddhas appear? 2,500 years ago, Buddha Shakyamuni appeared. But that's not really that's That's not really what's happening. It's more like, when do beings perceive Buddha appearing in the world? You get, it's very important difference. It's much more correct. Because the presence of the Buddha is never ending. The Buddha is never not present. Actually, this is one of the main kind of really crucial points of the Lotus Sutra. In the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha says that directly. The Buddha is never gone. It never appears and is never gone. It seems to appear and it seems to disappear. It seems to have been born as a human being and attain enlightenment, and then it seems to die and pass away. But that's only a matter of perception. It's not actually how it is. The Buddha is all ever present. The Buddha said that's directly in the Lotus Sutra. Is one of the most important, one of the key messages in the Lotus Sutra is actually this one. So how can these Nirmanakaya, so now we speak of Nirmanakaya, if we speak of Nirmanakaya aspect, so how can this Nirmanakaya manifestation appear and be perceived by beings? Because that's the question here, right? How are Buddhas seen? So how can a Nirmanakaya manifestation appear and be perceived? Only when there is merit for it. But this is not a matter of reward. That's the thing with the word merit. I always say I don't like the word merit very much, because it always sounds a little bit more like, oh, good boy, you get a little merit badge, little star, It's not a really great word. I like more roots of virtue. I use roots of virtue more for that. There's different expressions we could use that are also okay, but or good roots. Somehow it's better like this. Anyway, the meaning is just, how is our mind? How is this mind? That's really, if we go to the essence of the meaning, is how is our mind? Is our mind very obscured by defilements, by disturbing emotions, by confusion? Or is our mind pure enough that we can perceive the Buddha? That's all. That's all. You see, sentient beings, before they reach the first stage, the first bhumi, the bhumis come later in the text. So when we speak of the path from the perspective of the Mahayana, right, we speak of the path of accumulation, the path of junction, and then the path of seeing, which is the first bhumi. The path of seeing is when the first time there's direct, non-conceptual realization of emptiness and the ultimate reality. That's when the being becomes no longer a sentient being. That's when a being becomes beyond the world, right? Is the first bhumi, is that point. So practitioners, before reaching the first bhumi, before reaching that path of seeing, can only perceive Buddhas as Nirmanakaya form. They cannot perceive directly the Sambhogakaya or the Dharmakaya. So before reaching the first bhumi, beings can only perceive Nirmanakaya forms, manifest forms. The bodhisattvas that reached the level, so after the first bhumi, after the path of seeing, so the bodhisattvas that are on the path of seeing and above, they can directly perceive the Sambhogakaya forms of Buddha, for example, directly. So you see, it all depends on our perception. And this perception is connected to our capacity, which in turn is connected to our defilements and roots of virtue. Roots of virtue is a big thing here, okay? So, as I said before, one of the main things, of course, is wisdom. Wisdom is also part of the roots of virtue. Right? So, for example, any given individual, any given person, they perceived a statue of the Buddha, just a statue of the form or a picture, and they feel something. It has kind of, if they feel something, if there is some kind of effect, some kind of positive effect on the mind, maybe, while other people don't see anything there. It's just some guy sitting, And there are even other people who feel anger, who feel aversion towards the statue. And maybe they even want to destroy it. So if there is sufficient merit, then it will be possible to see the Buddha. And here it means, like, that's what the line says here, all 32 ablaze. So if there is enough merit, if there is enough roots of virtue, if you can see the Buddha enough directly, it will be possible to see the Buddha with all the major and minor marks. So I will not explain now what these marks are. That will make the teaching a bit of a sidetrack. I don't want to go there now. But if you're curious, you can Google. You can Google 32 major marks of the Buddha and 80 minor marks of the Buddha. If you're curious, you can search for yourself. So if you have enough roots of virtue, you can perceive that, or can perceive that directly. So now, when Buddha Shakyamuni was on our world, or was appearing in our world, not everybody perceived the marks. Most people would only perceive the human form. But if there is sufficient virtue, you can perceive the major marks or the minor marks. Again, this is to do with this pure vision, with the perception. But if you search for this, maybe then you get a bit confused. But because they can sound, these 32 major marks, they can sound very strange, like very strange Buddha, like it will say things like that like the marks, these 32 major marks. It will say things like that the Buddha has flat feet, totally flat feet, completely flat, like a duck, flat soles, completely flat-footed. But what is the meaning of that? Why is that? So all these things are explained in the sutras. For example, the reason why the Buddha has flat feet is that the flat feet actually is a symbolic expression. It means that the Buddha is completely immovable from upholding pure virtue. The Buddha is completely immovable from upholding pure virtue. That's the meaning of the flat feet. Another one it will say that the Buddha has a very long finger. It's like, alien fingers, and that is related to non-harming and non-stealing. It's completely free from any karma of taking what is not given and not doing any harm. That's kind of the meaning of the long fingers. Another one. The Buddha has 40 teeth. 40 teeth. And the cause for that is never telling a lie, being completely free from all the karma of deception. For example, so if you just read the 32 major marks, the Buddha has a very long tongue that can reach the top of his head, and the Buddha has very long ears, like this, and the Buddha has a bump on the top of his head, and it has webbed fingers, like the fingers are webbed like a duck. It has all these things. This is very strange creature. Very strange alien. But we need to understand in the sutra this is all explained, what is the causal and the meaning of all of these 32 major marks. 32 major marks, 80 minor marks. So if someone has perfect, kind of sufficient roots of virtue, they can perceive directly these 32 marks in the Buddha, this perfect upholding virtue, this perfection of not taking what's given, and so on. It's perceivable. Somehow it's perceivable. I suppose that's enough to say it like this. I'll do 55. I think. Yeah. So 55, stanza 55. Though the protector's Rupakaya may remain for many eons, for guiding those in need of guidance, this very Dhatu shows as different. So, though the protector, though the Buddha's Rupakaya, so I explained that last time, right? The Rupakaya is the form Kaya, the Sambhogakaya and the Nirmanakaya. So, though the Buddha's Rupakaya may remain for many eons, for guiding all those that need guidance, this element shows as different. So what does it mean? So in terms of the Buddha's own realization forms, or the form of a Buddha, we speak of the 3 kayas or the 5 kayas. Sometimes we can speak of 5 kayas, but for here is enough to speak of the 3 kayas. So we have the Dharmakaya, which is the ultimate body of truth. The Dharmakaya is we can say the Dharmakaya is really the body of truth. So the full realization of the element, when the element becomes completely freed, when Buddha nature becomes completely freed from defilements and manifests full Buddhahood, that's the Dharmakaya, right? So the Dharmakaya, in that sense, we can say is the ultimate body of the truth, of the total realization of Buddhahood, total awakening. That's the Dharmakaya. Then there is the Rupakaya, which, as I said before, it includes the 2 form kayas for the benefit of others, the Sambhogakaya and the Nirmanakaya. I used the example last time of the lamp and that toy that spins around. Remember? So to exemplify the light as the Dharmakaya, the luminosity as the Sambhogakaya, and the forms that are displayed as the Nirmanakaya, right? So here speaking about the Rupakaya, which is Sambhogakaya and the Nirmanakaya. So the Sambhogakaya, the normal translation to English would be the body of enjoyment, and the Nirmanakaya, the bodies of manifestation. So these 3 kayas, the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya, they are not like 3 different Buddhas, right? So I think I said this before, but just to explain, Buddha is Buddha. Buddha is Buddha. That's it. These 3 kayas are only from the perspective of others. Only from the perspective of others we can speak of 3 kayas. From the perspective of the Buddha, there's no such thing. It's just Buddha. The total, so the awakened mind itself abides primordially as the Dharmakaya and manifests enlightened activity for the benefit of others. And that benefit, that manifestation of that benefit, it appears as the Rupakaya. For the bodhisattvas that have realized emptiness and are on the higher stages of the path, so for the bodhisattvas that are on the path of cultivation, so on the bhumis, on the stages, it appears as the Sambhogakaya forms. So bodhisattvas on the path can directly perceive, and they receive teachings, sort of, directly from the Sambhogakaya forms. They don't receive teachings like these, like talking. In some explanations, it says that bodhisattvas that are on the high bhumis, they can directly perceive the Sambhogakaya forms of the Buddhas. And just the perception of the Sambhogakaya forms, it is enough. Just by perceiving that, they can see what they can see what they still have not realized. They can see what they still have to realize further. And that itself is the teaching. It's direct, like symbolic, so to speak. And directly they understand. So it's not, they don't receive teachings like speaking or something like this. They don't have to sit in webcasts. Okay. they can perceive directly the Sambhogakaya form, and just by that they can see the difference. Maybe that's the best way to say. They can see the difference between what they have realized and what they perceive there. And by seeing these different, the all teachings there of what they have still to practice, and like this they progress and they see higher and higher like this. For example, that's how it's explained sometimes in some texts. For sentient beings in samsara that cannot perceive directly the Sambhogakaya manifestations, it manifests as Nirmanakaya forms. And this can be like a human form Buddha, like Shakyamuni or Padmasambhava, or even like some statues, stupas, representation of deities, yidams, like when you have a yidam, like Vajrasattva, for example, which has this, like all these implements, right? It has the Vajra and the bell, and the Vajra means this, the bell means this, the crown and the things, That's kind of a Nirmanakaya manifestation, because it's in a similar fashion. There's a representation of Buddha there, like this. So for sentient beings that are on samsara, it manifests like this. It's manifold Nirmanakayas, manifold Nirmanakaya forms. Whatever way it can benefit beings, to bring them into the path, to help them accumulate these roots of virtue, or to generate these roots of virtue. Bodhisattvas can even Buddhas and Bodhisattvas can even manifest Nirmanakaya forms, not as spiritual teachers. They can manifest Nirmanakaya forms in other ways to bring people that don't have the roots of virtue, people that cannot see Buddhas, They can manifest Nirmanakaya forms for those beings to help them generate the roots of virtue, to bring them into the path, like this, That's Buddha's job, That's Buddha's job, like this, So that's kind of the meaning that is presented here in this stanza, that the Rupakaya forms manifest and they remain endlessly, as needed to benefit and to lead beings to awakening. So, from this perspective, it seems that there is some duality here, or some activity happening, like Buddhas and beings. But from the perspective of the Dharmadhatu, or the Dharmakaya, there is no duality, there is no difference at all. That's what it says there in the stanza. Though the protector's Rupakaya may remain for eons for guiding those in need of guidance, this very Dhatu manifests as different. So it means that this same element, or the Dharmadhatu, can manifest all of these things, but the Dharmakaya is just there, immovable. Total self-realization. Yeah, I don't like self-realization here, because when we speak about Dharmakaya, it's not even about self-realization anymore. It's just what is. It is just what is. We speak of self-realization from the perspective of being on the path. That's all. From the perspective of Buddha, there is no such thing. It is just what always was. That's something else that Buddha Shakyamuni says in the Lotus Sutra. In Lotus, the Buddha Shakyamuni says that he always was. He always was. He always was. Always will be. Buddha is not a personal matter. And I think, this is, again, this topic of the refuge, of the three jewels, this is something we need to still stir and kind of go over a lot, I have a feeling. I think there's a lot of misconceptions here still to be kind of broken apart. There's a lot of, I feel that there's still a lot of personalization put into this that is incorrect. And we don't really understand the Dharma. We make it into something too personal. And that is kind of problematic. Anyway. I want to finish this part. Give me a. There's not so much. Let me. I'm going to finish. 56. 56. On definitely targeting its goal, consciousness engages in its object. Within the purity of self-awareness, the Bodhisattva's grounds are all inherently abide. On definitely targeting its goal, consciousness engages in its object. Within the purity of self-awareness, the Bodhisattva's grounds all inherently abide. So what does this mean? How can we come to reach this vision? Okay, how can we come to understand this vision, to reach this vision? So by understanding the path, the teachings are the object that consciousness engages with. That's what it's saying in this stanza. Consciousness engages in its object. Right? So the path, by understanding the path, so the teachings, the path is the object that consciousness engages with. The consciousness engages with the teachings, with the path. By perceiving the Buddha, by seeing Buddhas, whatever that means, as I said, because that changes, right? That depends on wherever a person is on their own level. So by perceiving Buddha, or listening to Buddha, or reading a Dharma book, or listening to a Dharma teaching, it's all the same, you understand. In the end, it's all the same. In a way, not in a way, it's actually the same, it's just different levels. It's like, it's a really bad example, but it's a really bad example, but it's good for just this particular aspect. It's like you can listen to a song on the radio kind of from far away, like a distant sound of a song. You can walk closer and have a clear listening to the song on the radio. You can get a high quality MP3 recording and play that, and you can listen to it much better. You can go to a concert of that artist and listen in person to that person singing. And if you have enough virtue, you can be in the same room in private, and that singer will sing the song to you. But then you don't have auto-tune. These days I don't know, but you get the point, right? So it's always the same song. Either you're listening to it from very far away on the radio, or you get closer to it and you listen better on the radio, but the quality isn't that great, or you put a high quality recording on an MP3 or CD or whatever, and you listen to it and it's much better quality, or you go to a concert. Yeah, sometimes that's actually not so good, but anyway, you get the point. And now it's the actual person singing there, but it's very noisy, Or if you have a lot of merit, you can have a private show, and the singer sings to you privately, like this. It's always the same song. So when we speak about seeing Buddha, seeing the picture, listening to the Dharma talk, reading a book, meeting a Buddha in person, it's all the same somehow. Okay? Or coming to realize your own Buddha nature. It's all the same. I don't know if I'm explaining this right. Probably not. This is so difficult. This part is so profound, actually. But we'll come back to it later, I think. But anyway. So that's why we do like this. That's why it says like this here. consciousness engages in its object. The mind, the consciousness engages in the path, in the teachings. So by perceiving Buddha, whatever that means, so by placing our consciousness upon the Buddha and the Dharma, we will unfold this clarity of self-present awareness to its total purity. Do you understand? By placing our mind in the Buddha and the Dharma, we will unfold the clarity of self-present awareness until we reach total purity. And that is exactly which becomes the meaning of abiding in the stages of the Bodhisattva's path. Right? That's why it says there, within the purity of self-awareness, the Bodhisattva's grounds all inherently abide, which means that within the purity of this self-awareness, of this self-luminous awareness, within that self-luminous awareness, that's itself where what we speak about when we speak about these stages of the bhumi, so the stages of the path. It's exactly the same thing. Okay? And then finally, there's 57. The mighty Lord's magnificent abode, the beautiful domain of Akanishta and consciousness, the three of them can be blended into one, I dare to say. The mighty Lord's magnificent abode, which is the domain of Akanishta, and consciousness, the three of them are blended into one. So I know I struggle a little bit which translation to use for this verse, because there are slightly different variations of this verse, of this stanza. And in some commentary tradition, it seems to imply that. So what is the three of them? So here it says, the three of them, the three of them, the three of them can be blended into one. So what are these three? What are these three of them? And there's a couple of different commentarial traditions on this. In some commentaries, it seems to imply that the three of them here is referring to three consciousnesses, but I don't really favor that type of commentary very much. I prefer the direct meaning that is here, and that's more to the point. That's a different kind of commentary on this. So the three of them here, my preferred explanation of this is that what are the three of them? The three of them is the magnificent abode, the domain of Akanishta, of form and consciousness. So it says there, the mighty Lord's magnificent abode, that's one. The Akanishta of form is two, and consciousness, three. So he's saying the three of them are the same, are blended into one. Which is directly pointed to the verse. I prefer this type of commentary on this stanza. So when we speak of the Akanishta, which means the pure dimension of the great expanse, Akanishta is the pure dimension of the great expanse. There are three kinds of Akanishta. There are three Akanishtas, if you will, like this. You know, there's the ultimate Akanishta of the Dharmakaya or Dharmadhatu. There's the pure dimension of the Sambhogakaya of manifestation, the Akanishta of the Sambhogakaya of manifestation, the space of manifestation of Sambhogakaya, which you'll, in some texts, you'll read it as called the densely arrayed, the Akanishta of the densely arrayed, the dense array. And then there's the pure land or the mundane Akanishta. So the pure land or the form Akanishta, it refers to the highest level of what's called the form realm. And that's the place of Nirmanakayas. So the main point here is that from having done the path of accumulation of sentient beings, they can perceive the Nirmanakaya forms of the Buddha, as I explained before. From the first stage of the path of seeing, so upon the first moment of realization of the ultimate nature of the path of seeing, from that point up to the seventh bhumi of the Bodhisattva's path, we'll get into the bhumis a bit later, I'm sorry for that, but the text is like this. So from the path of seeing to the seventh bhumi, they can perceive the Sambhogakaya forms, as I explained before. And in the last three bhumis, the last three stages before full Buddhahood, they are able to perceive the Dharmakaya directly. But in the end, these are not different, they become one. That's what Nagarjuna is saying here. What Nagarjuna is saying here is they become one. The magnificent abode, which is the Akanishta of the Dharmakaya, the Akanishta of the Sambhogakaya, and consciousness become one. They're not different. They appear different along the path, but they are not different. The Akanishta of the Dharmakaya, which is ever present, in the end is no different than the other two. In the next verses, we will, at some point, we'll go through the bhumis, explanation of the bhumis, so we will kind of still come back to this. Okay, I think like this we finish this part. Good. Any questions? No questions? Then if there are no questions, we've finished for today. Come back on Thursday for more roots of virtue. Okay, so in that case, I wish you a good night, and I'll see you next time.